If we are to assume that all major countercultural movements are of inorganic origin and are promoted and manipulated to serve a wider social engineering agenda, then it appears two-tone is perhaps the most nakedly astroturfed of them all. To explore this, we must first consider Britain's societal state of play in the run-up to the scene's sudden emergence in 1979. Economically, Britain was suffering, with high youth unemployment being especially felt in towns previously reliant on an industrial sector. Failures, or perhaps by design, in post-war town planning had created social problems and breakdowns in what had been traditional multi-generational communities. This was compounded by the fruits of Britain's post-war Third World migration policy coming into its second generation, and racial tensions were high. These tensions were reflected in the emergence of political parties such as the National Front, which advocated for repatriation and a restoration of Britain's pre-war homogeneity. Nationalist sentiment was gaining traction across society, notably amongst young, disaffected youth, many of whom, having missed the quickly imploding punk rock scene, were being drawn into the skinhead revival, with its accompanying racially charged politics. The skinhead scene, along with the football terraces, were being openly used as recruiting grounds for groups such as the National Front. It seems inarguable that the behavioural psychologists and social scientists within the likes of Tavistock would be monitoring this situation closely. I would suggest that they would have concluded that such a demographic might need a cultural nudge towards unity and multicultural values. To explore this potentiality, we will first look at the founder of the Two-Tone record label and the founding member and musical director of the specials, Jerry Dammers. Jeremy David Hounslow Dammers was born in Uttakamund, Tamil Nadu, South India, the son of prominent Anglican clergyman Horace Dammers, who would later become the Dean of Bristol Cathedral from 1973 to 1987. When looking at Jerry Dammers' legacy, it's impossible to ignore parallels with that of his father's work. Alfred Hounslow Horace Dammers, that's his father, was born in Great Yarmouth, 1922, to a family of Hanoverian origin. His great-grandfather had been adjunct general to King George V of Hanover. George V was Queen Victoria's first cousin and the last ever Hanoverian king. King George was respected by his relatives on the British throne, and amongst his many honours was a member of the Order of the Garter, a particularly august order within the British honours system. Let's take a short moment and look at what Dammers' grandfather's role of adjunct general may have involved. In the context of Hanoverian royalty, here's how a role similar to adjutant general would function. 1. Military leadership. The adjutant general, or similar title, would serve as the primary assistant to the monarch or a senior military commander, managing the overall administration of the army, including orders, logistics, troop deployments, and personnel matters. 2. The royal household. An adjutant or adjutant of the royal family could have served in a role akin to a senior aide, helping the royal family with formal and ceremonial duties. This might include organising royal military reviews, ceremonial parades, or events that required military precision and coordination. Advisory role. In some cases, such a figure would advise the monarch on military affairs and strategy, liaising between the monarch and the armed forces. Since monarchs like those in Hanover held significant military power in their realms, an adjutant general or an adjunct would be crucial in managing royal military obligations. 4. Ceremonial function. Given the importance of pageantry and tradition in monarchies, an adjunct general might assist in overseeing royal ceremonies that involved military participation, ensuring everything proceeded according to ceremonial protocol. So, as we can see, a highly influential and respected member of the top brass of Hanoverian royal family's administration and an expert on pageantry of the royal courts, I don't think it takes too much of a leap of imagination to suggest that being a member of certain secret societies would have been likely. So the paternal line of House Dammers contains not only a senior royal aide to prominent European royalty, but also highly influential social figures, as we will see, with Horace and Jerry, both of whom furthered the same radical progressivism and anti-traditional agenda in their respective milieus. Let's look at Jerry's father, Alfred Hounslow Horace Dammers. Dammers was educated at the esteemed private boarding school Malvern College. Among the alumni of the college since its foundation in 1865 are Nobel laureates, Olympic gold medalists, and many notable persons from various fields, including heads of state, high-ranking military personnel, royalty, media personalities, and scientists. C.S. Lewis and prominent maths pioneer Alan Turing also attended Malvern, as did son and brother of Freemasons James Dalrymple in recent years. From Malvern, he attended Cambridge and read classics for a year before wrestling with his pacifism and joining the army in 1940. He would return to Cambridge post-war and study theology and train for a ministry at Westcott House. He served in the Royal Artillery during World War II and was ordained in 1948. His first posts were curacies in Adlington and Edgbaston. He was a lecturer at Queen's College, Birmingham, and then chaplain of St. John's College, Palayamkotoi, that's in India, I guess. Next, he became vicar of Holy Trinity, Millhouses. In 1965, he became a canon residentiary and director of studies at Coventry Cathedral until his appointment as the Dean of Bristol in 1973, a post he held until retirement 16 years later. When looking at Horace's career within the clergy, we can see how radical he really was, an epitome of the sort of progressivism we have now seen as standard within the C of E. As well as being renowned for advocating a multi-faith inclusivity, he was an early proponent of the nascent environmental movement within the church. Quote, in 1972, Horace founded our lifestyle movement. The motto was simple, to live simply so that others could simply live. His goal was to enlighten people to the importance of wise personal and individual use of the earth's resources and the critical issues of peace, justice, and the environment. He believed that a simple lifestyle would release the resources and energies necessary for social change, end quote. One of the main tenets of the lifestyle movement was to advocate for communal use of materials, sharing cars, lawnmowers, household tools between neighbours, etc., encouraging the use of bicycles. It stated its opposition to nuclear power and over-reliance on aviation as a means of travel. Sound familiar? I think it's fair to assume that Horace would be delighted with the World Economic Forum's approach of promoting a personal sense of carbon accountability. His dream of minimalist societies sharing communal resources sounds strikingly close to their "you'll own nothing but be happy" credo, and the burgeoning QR code car share apps and the like that are being phased in around certain progressive hotspots and thus everywhere else later. Subsequent to his founding of the lifestyle movement, it seems the Church of England hierarchy rewarded him with the role of Dean of Bristol Cathedral. Quote, his years at Bristol Cathedral, 73 to 87, were creative. The importance of the cathedral to Bristol was evidenced by the huge number of services it hosted. Dammers' friendliness enabled these occasions to be more than formal. Civic, academic, legal, school, and minority communities were all welcomed. He created a peace chapel used for amnesty vigils and anti-apartheid prayers. Student volunteers worked in the crypt, and there were occasions for missions to seamen and for the lifestyle movement, which he had founded in 1972. That's sea, as in the water, by the way, just to be clear, although maybe not, which he had founded in 1972. And it's, quote, live simply that others may live motto. Some criticised this demanding range as bringing politics into religion, but many were influenced in their search for a life of magnanimity and integrity. It goes on. One of Dammers' colleagues remarked, we talk, the Dean does. He packed the cathedral with Roman Catholics saying Mass. At interfaith services, the building resonated with the sound of Om. Asian minorities and those of the Jewish faith were among his friends. End quote. When we look at the era, it's clear how revolutionary his approach was. Chantings from Eastern religions within the cathedral, many would view as sacrilegious. One might note that this sort of multi-faith movement within the church chimes entirely with the purported goals of a future world order, drawing together beliefs from around the world to form one global religion. Quote, more controversially, he established a peace chapel for private prayer and prayer vigils by organisations such as Amnesty International and the anti-apartheid movement. There were mutterings from some that he was bringing politics into religion, and some Anglicans at the time were uneasy with his changes. End quote. So within 3 generations of House Dammers, we have a top-ranking royal aide whose duties, amongst others, included performing ceremonial duties for the king, and a radical progressive vicar whose influence seems to perfectly resonate with the environmental movement, openly advocating for multiculturalism, multi-faith worship within the Christian church, and bringing left-wing politics into prayer groups and into the wider faith. So let's move to the man himself, Mr. Jeremy David Hounsell Dammers. Born 22nd of May 1955 in Uttakamund, Tamil Nadu, South India, where his father had been a minister at the time, he later attended the King Henry VIII private school in Coventry, which was established in 1545. Dammers purportedly decided at the age of 10 that he would dedicate himself to the music business and having his own band, and spent his teenage years learning music and studying songwriting. He played in a range of bands from reggae to punk to country and western, then attended Lancaster Polytechnic to study art before forming the Automatics, which would later go on to become the Specials. His aim was to produce punky reggae, which the likes of The Clash were becoming known for, but unlike the latter's stylistically bastardized interpretations, which amounted to white rock musicians having a stab at reggae, to instead have competent reggae musicians involved. Having put the core of the band together, his goal was to recruit the recently bandless pre-Public Image Limited John Lydon, passing a tape to one of Lydon's inner circle on a trip to London. The tape never reached Lydon, but instead ended up with Clash Svengali and early life international Marxist Bernie Rhodes. Rhodes' seemingly spurious claims of inventing punk rock are in fact bolstered by viewing his track record. He introduced and lobbied for the inclusion of John Lydon to fellow early lifer and subversive conspirator Malcolm McLaren's nascent Sex Pistols, then fronted by Steve Jones, and was ultimately responsible for his inclusion within the band. He was the driving force behind the Clash's political posturing and responsible for Strummer's defection from the 101ers and subsequent introduction to Jones and Simonon. He managed the Specials and brought them to prominence, with regular support spots on Clash tours, as well as playing a prominent role in nurturing Dexy's Midnight Runners and Subway Sect. Son of a Belgian communist, Paul Simonon, quote, "You can't overestimate Bernie's importance. He set up the whole punk scene, basically. He saw how non-musicians like me and John Lydon could contribute." End quote. Rhodes brought the Specials, aka the Automatics, they had been forced to change their names due to an existing band called the Automatics, onto the Clash's Oh Parole tour, and introduced them on stage as an abbreviated the Specials aka, and the name stuck. It was on this tour that they first encountered racially charged violence at a concert, when far-right skinheads attended and attacked the stage, featuring fellow support act Suicide in Bracknell. This was hot on the heels of NF Skins rioting at a Sham 69 gig at the Fabian-founded London School of Economics, causing £7,500 of damage, a very large sum back in 1978. One might speculate on whether they had been politically encouraged in such destructive behaviour, given the venue. In the wake of this, Dammers states that, quote, "Bracknell was the night I realised I had to get through to these people. It was obvious a modern skinhead revival was coming through, and I was trying to find a way for it not to go the way of the National Front and the British movement. I saw punk as a piss-take of rock music, but couldn't believe people took it seriously. It seemed healthier to have an integrated form of British music, rather than white people playing punk and blacks playing ska. Two-tone was an integration of the two." End quote. It was shortly after this that Rhodes, seemingly chiming with Dammers' sentiments, told him that it was time to, quote, "change direction and sort out their jumble of a sound once and for all." End quote. This amounted to focusing on one all-encompassing style of punky ska, rather than the odd numbers of both punctuating each other. Rhodes told them that they needed a full package of image and sound, and instructed them to adopt a mixture of rude boy and skinhead fashion, and had them decked out in tonic suits, loafers, pork pie hats, and Abercrombie jackets. In the words of Terry Hall, Bernie Rhodes was right. Clothes are important. For me, they are almost as important as the music. They are vital to the whole thing. End quote. With the image becoming formed, Dammers, realizing that an instantly recognizable logo would aid with promotion, set about the next stage in forming this full package. He and fellow former art student and bassist Horace Panter worked on a few ideas inspired by the pop art scene, before Dammers was inspired by the name Two-Tone and how it encapsulated the multiracial aspect behind the project. From this, he purportedly had the eureka moment of a chessboard black and white logo. Horace Panter, quote, "I came up with the number 2 over tone, but it was Jerry that designed the black and white chessboard and the two-tone man, who was based on a caricature of Peter Tosh." Let's take a moment to point out a fact that likely will not have escaped many viewers, that being that the chessboard design is straight out of the Masonic imagery copybook. This is not speculative, it is openly stated by Masonic organizations. Quote, "The chessboard, or more specifically the black and white checkered floor used by Freemasons, symbolizes several important concepts within Masonic philosophy and ritual. Here are some of the main interpretations. 1. Duality. The black and white squares are often seen as representations of duality in life, light and darkness, good and evil, knowledge and ignorance. This highlights the idea that life is a balance of opposing forces, and navigating this balance is central to Masonic teachings. 2. Initiation and knowledge. In Masonic lodges, the checkered floor is often associated with the space where Masons receive instruction and initiation. It suggests that understanding the duality of existence is a key part of gaining knowledge and wisdom. 3. Architectural symbolism. The floor of the Temple of King Solomon, a significant symbolic structure in Freemasonry, is sometimes described as having a checkered pattern. This connects the chessboard motif to the Masonic reverence for ancient architecture and geometry as metaphors for building one's character and understanding the universe. In sum, the chessboard or checkered floor is a symbol that encapsulates complex Masonic ideas about morality, duality, and the human experience." End quote. Again, we have to look at Jerry Dammers' heritage in connection with his design here. Is it just coincidence that this man, whose great-grandfather was an adjunct general of Hanoverian royalty and held a key role performing and coordinating ceremonies for a top European royal house, would come up with a Masonic design? Doubly so when we look at his father's role in the Anglican Church, progressive politics, and being part of the first wave of the climate change and responsible living agenda. Colour me cynical, but I see a hidden hand in these proceedings. Rhodes got them onto the bill of a Damn tour in April 1979, further showcasing their now repackaged skinhead rude boy crossover sound and look. The buzz around them grew, and in May that year, on the eve of the general election, they headlined the Moonlight Club in West Hampstead. Quote, 300 kids attended, including Skins, Punks, and the newly spawned Rudies. Also in attendance were Mick Jagger, Chrissie Hynde, and Elvis Costello, as well as A&R men for Warner Brothers, A&M, Island, and Virgin. Jagger spoke of his admiration for the Specials to gathering reporters. "I think the Specials are great. They play music with deep roots, and that's something I like. I really get off on the Specials." End quote. Indeed, Jagger was so taken with Dammers' project that he wanted to sign them for his burgeoning Rolling Stones records. Dammers, however, had other plans, which amounted to running his own label, Two-Tone, under the Chrysalis umbrella. Umbrella is perhaps an apt word to describe it, especially when looking at the label's logo. With music industry buzz and high praise from international rock stars ringing in their ears, it's not surprising that the momentum was building. Quote, "The first pressing of Gangsters had sold out completely, and over the next few weeks the speed of developments were staggering." End quote. This all coincided with the emergence of the Rock Against Racism movement, which had been started in the wake of Eric Clapton's support for Enoch Powell and Third World repatriation. The previous year, this had resulted in a huge carnival against the Nazis in Victoria Park, East London. This massive concert and protest march in London drew around 100,000 people. It started with a march from Trafalgar Square to Victoria Park in the East End, where a concert featuring bands like The Clash, Buzzcocks, Sham 69, X-Ray Specs, Tom Robinson Band, and others took place. The pressure group Rock Against Racism was reborn years later under the name Love Music, Hate Racism, which would heavily feature Dammers. Quote, "It is said that in its short life, Two-Tone did more to help racial matters than Rock Against Racism. We started around the same time, so it's all part of the same thing, said Dammers. For me, it was no good being anti-racist if you didn't involve black people, so what the Specials tried to do was create something more integrated." End quote. With the band in the ascendance, work was scheduled for a debut album, and who should be installed as producer but Elvis Costello. I've done a video on Costello previously. Perhaps I'll put some image on the screen that will indicate where he was coming from day one. Born Declan Patrick McManus, Costello grew up in a musical family. His father was the band leader and trumpeter Ross McManus, who went on to have success as a commercial songwriter with arrangements of pop hits, and most rewardingly for advertising work, including writing and singing The Secret Lemonade Drinker, which was used by White's Lemonade throughout the 1970s. He had been discovered by Joe Loss, Order of the British Empire, for the Joe Loss Big Band. Loss, born in Israel and raised in the East End of London, took on a paternalistic role for Ross. His strict discipline and music industry nous stood Ross in good stead for his later music industry success. By Costello's adolescence, his father's music career really was taken off. One can only imagine what a fertile breeding ground this must have been, not only in musical technique, but in understanding the nature of the industry and what it takes to achieve success. His song, I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea, is not in relation to the fashionable district of West London, rather about the Chelsea Hotel in New York City and the location of many mysterious suicides, murders and drug overdoses, as well as many reports of occultist activity, and what has now become the standard music industry monitoring and psychologically handling of talent. The message in the song is that Costello doesn't want to meet a bad end whilst navigating a path in the music industry full of sharks, occultists and malevolent secret societies. You are free to draw your own conclusions of how he might have managed to achieve this thus far. At this point, we should take a quick look at the lead singer of the band, Terry Hall. Terence Edward Hall was born on the 19th of March 1959 in Coventry to a working-class family of Anglo-Irish descent. This culture brew was added to by a Jewish grandfather who had emigrated from Germany. Hall said of his heritage, quote, "I grew up in an environment where you really didn't know where you were from. Coventry was built on immigrants because it was an industrial city looking for cheap labour. I don't think it's an accident that a group like the Specials came out of that." End quote. He sang in the Coventry punk band Squad, from which Dammers saw him and approached him for the Dammers crossover punk reggae project, which would become the Specials. After leaving the Specials, Hall went public on some deeply disturbing anecdotes of childhood abuse. He states that he was abducted by a teacher, driven to France, where he was given to a paedophile ring and abused for days. The following is a short summary of the case. Quote, "From what I gather from the song and interviews, his teacher told him he was going on a school trip. When Terry turned up at the meeting point for the bus, expecting to see school friends waiting, it was just the teacher in his car. He drove him to France via ferry to a hotel, abused him when he slept, then the next day handed him over to a ring of paedophiles. How many times he was abused over those 4 days and by how many different men doesn't bear thinking about. They kept him locked in a wardrobe apparently. He was then driven back to the UK, punched in the face and dumped at the side of a road like a bag of trash. He was 12 years old." End quote. In a Mojo magazine interview, Hall said, "That was the whole thing about being abused as a kid. The abuse was horrendous. It was like taken away and abducted and locked in fucking wardrobes and being horribly abused. But I wanted to share it with people. That's the only good thing that can come out of it. If you can talk to people and someone thinks, fucking hell, it's not just me, maybe I can deal with it. That's what you should do, right? Because you might do some good. You might do some good." End quote. Deeply disturbing, but does pose questions that conspiratorially minded people might wonder. Firstly, would it be conceivable that his abuser was known to security services or potentially even connected to them in some way? Could it conceivably be part of or adjacent to trauma-based mind control network? Secondly, as Hall went public on this matter in the early 1980s, approximately 12 years after the abuse was said to have occurred, why was there never a criminal investigation into it? Nothing comes up when searching for this. If this is the case, why not? The teacher was known to Hall. Why was he never investigated? Assuming it's all true and a predatory gang of child rapists were operating in France with a fixer accomplice working in UK schools, why solely write a song about it? He said that it was his French teacher. Well, why write a song about it 10 years later rather than go after the perpetrator himself? Even if he was not still working for the school, no doubt employment records would exist. He could be traced and brought to justice. Yet there seems to have been no investigation, attempted prosecution of this man, or attempt to break up this ring. Is writing a song about it really all that could have been done? A man and a gang like this are hardly going to stop at one child. One can understand a traumatized child burying an incident like this, but to latterly confront it in public in the form of a song, but not also report the offender to the police, seems incongruous. Again, no criminal investigation into this case ever seems to have occurred. All in all, deeply disturbing stuff. If we are to look at the lyrical content of the specials, we see recurring themes. Much Too Young can be seen as an attack on motherhood and the traditional family structure. Quote, "You've done too much too young. Now you're married with a son when you should be having fun with me," Hall steered, singing Dahmer's lyrics. Quote, "Making currant buns for tea," he spits at the idea of a young mother wasting her life preparing food for her child before "Ain't he cute? No he ain't. He's just another burden on the welfare state." A sentiment that sounds a lot more Chatham House than council. Then we have the song Happy Marriage, which contains the lyrics, "He wanted to be something, but now he never will. She got him where she wanted and forgot to take the pill. And she thinks she'll be happy hanging out the nappies. If that's a happy marriage, I prefer to be unhappy." End quote. Dahmer's messaging seems repeatedly to smear the notion of settling down in a traditional family structure and raising children within a marriage. One might conclude that this messaging appears entirely simpatico with the wider 20th century deep state social engineering agenda that his father's work also seems to have embodied, each within their own chosen demographic. Numerous songs are on the subject of anti-racism, a sentiment that many will see on the face of it as reasonable enough. Yet under the surface, the intention seems to be to promote the burgeoning multicultural society in the, quite frankly, vindicated Enoch Powell-inspired repatriation movements of the late 1970s. The word racist in its modern application was first applied by Leon Trotsky. Prior to this adoption, a racist was someone who believed in his people and placed their interests beyond that of others. In Victorian or early 20th century, it would essentially mean patriotic. Trotsky and the international communists, and latterly their friends in the media and education, have of course changed that meaning, and now the word has been turned into a linguistic cosh to keep the wider European descended public in line. It strikes me as fitting when encountering it to replace it with in-group preferential, or in-group preference, as essentially that is what the real target is with its application. So rock against racism becomes rock against in-group preference, which really is, in my opinion at least, getting down to brass tacks regarding such a movement's intentions. 1979 culminated in a purportedly show-stealing appearance at the Hammersmith Odeon for the artist known as Paul McCartney's UNICEF charity concert. The event, spread over the 26th to the 29th of December, featured Wings, Queen, The Clash, The Who, Ian Dury and the Blockheads. The specials, having caught McCartney's good left eye earlier that year, appeared on the third night as support to The Who. The event seems to preempt the nascent third world celebrity fundraising racket come international NGO that would latterly become Live Aid. Dahmer's focus on his political messaging seems to have taken its toll in his personal life, resulting in his long-term girlfriend leaving him due to changes in his personality. Dahmer suffered setbacks of a personal nature when his long-term girlfriend left him, citing changes in him in recent months. Linville Golding, there's another musician within the band, saw how hard it hit him. Quote, "Jerry's girl was great. When she was gone, it affected him badly, especially as they'd been together for years. Jerry hated violence, ignorance, and the likes of the National Front, and he gave up everything to fight for that cause. She couldn't take the strain and pressure of living with it all, I suppose." End quote. Dahmer's kept ploughing his furrow regardless and organised a charity fundraiser of his own for the family of Satnam Gill, an Asian student who had been stabbed to death in Coventry. He swiftly organised a concert for June the 20th under the banner of A Peaceful Response Against Racism, and with artists Hazel O'Connor and the Reluctant Stereotypes played Butts Athletic Stadium. The money raised would go to the local anti-racist charities and Satnam Gill's family. A couple of weeks later, on July the 4th, the band played Potter Newton Park in Leeds as part of the Carnival Against Racism event, which left Neville Staple purring, Quote, "It was like a zebra crossing. Black and white as far as you could see." End quote. Reading accounts and biographies of the band, one can see that Dammers was a very difficult person to deal with. It was always his project from day one, and he never relented in maintaining his grip on the band as its musical director and lyricist. Terry Hall, quote, "I might have thrown in a couple of lines here and there, but really Jerry wrote almost all the songs back then. I'd have felt uncomfortable singing the words if I didn't agree with them. But what he was basically saying, I agreed with, and so did the rest of the band. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been in the same band." End quote. However, Dammers was domineering and a hard taskmaster, and there are many anecdotes of how recording with him was a nightmare due to his obsessions in realizing his own personal vision for the band and fitting the other members into it. The Specials imploded due to internal tensions after a grueling American tour. Hall, Lindvall Golding, and Neville Staple left to form the more poppy Fun Boy 3, stating a desire to make more popular and less socially conscious music, essentially escaping the Dammers yoke. It would be wrong to conclude that this poppy direction would cast off the Specials' Tavistockian messaging, however. In Tunnel of Love, the institution of marriage is again attacked. Quote, "So you get engaged and have a party, only 17 when the wedding bells chime, got a room with a view and a kid on the way. Hope you can make it to the church on time, because the wedding list is getting longer, the bottom drawer is getting fuller, and you're not getting any younger. Can things get any better? So consequences, altered cases. You tried honeymoons in far off places, but the trial separation worked and ended up in a divorce case. You gave up your friends for a new way of life, and now ended up as ex-husband and wife. There were 22 catches when you struck your matches and threw away your life. The notion of repatriation is attacked in Going Home. Racist politicians call for repatriation, while bureaucrats ask for black deportation. This is my home. This is where I'm from, where I belong." End quote. On the subject of marriage, Hall later married film director Lindy Hayman. Yes, by the way, a director I've spoken about before, who was central in video production of many of the Britpop movement. Looking through her work within that scene, all the usual Masonic symbolism is at play. She directed several of Hall's singles, including this one, where Hall gives a Masonic handshake. Dammers felt betrayed at Hall's and Co.'s defection, destroying his vision of how the band would progress into the 1980s. And to this day, relations remain sour between the former members. When the Specials reformed in the late 2000s, Dammers was not invited to join, leading to more recriminations and bitterness behind the scenes. Dammers continued recording under the name The Special aka, recruiting Rhoda Dakar and Stan Campbell. The latter never could fit in with Dammers' controlling tendencies, grueling recording sessions, and insistence on things being exactly as he envisaged, and after 2 years chose to leave the band and chase solo fame. Never finding that, his fate took a particularly dark turn. Quote, "It was reported that Campbell's mental health began to take a turn for the worse following the failure of his solo record, and while in London he was involved in a number of sexual harassment cases. He later returned to Coventry where his mental health deteriorated, and it's been reported that there were times that he was homeless. In 2002, he was arrested for his involvement in a sex crime against a young woman and was convicted of the charge. Campbell has been sectioned indefinitely under the UK Mental Health Act to a psychiatric hospital to serve his sentence. The sad irony is that Campbell sang the song that helped free Nelson Mandela, but now he is imprisoned himself." End quote. The Special AK were unveiled to music press in December '82, along with their hard-hitting new single, War Crimes, The Crime Remains the Same. In this, Dammers writes about Belsen and how this narrative must be brought to mind when viewing world affairs, referencing it with Beirut. The video was interspersed with shots of barbed wire fences, alluding to this. Dammers followed this up with their next release, Racist Friend. The song's opening line instructs the listener that, quote, "If you have a racist friend, now is the time for that friendship to end." End quote. This was inspired by Dammers purging anyone from his social group, or sending them to Coventry if you prefer. Quote, "I knew I'd attracted hangers-on and decided that I had to get rid of anyone around me who had racist tendencies. I opened up my address book and began to scribble names out. It was what I needed to do, and I felt much better as a result. You've got to take a stand against racism in any form." End quote. Again, you're free to replace the word racist with in-group preferential as you see fit. The song continues, be it your sister, your brother, your cousin, your uncle, or your lover. Now is the time for that friendship to end. Quote, encouraging the breakup of familial relations on whether or not someone was signed up to what essentially is a globalist population replacement strategy for Europe. The song concludes with Dammers speaking directly to camera, stating that a woman should leave her husband if he is not on board with this. Again, it seems the breakup of the traditional family structure is endorsed, in this instance solely on political lines. Dammers effectively states that a husband being alarmed at the demographic decline of his city is justification alone for a woman to pack her bags and take the kids, raising them elsewhere in an anti-racist utopia of single parenthood. The B-side, Bright Lights, covered the Colin Roach controversy. Roach, a black man from London, whom according to the subsequent inquiry, having been released from prison in a state of psychological agitation, per his friend whom had driven him to the station, walked into the entrance of a police station in Stoke Newington, placed a shotgun in his mouth and killed himself. Allegations arose of a police cover-up and that the Met had instead taken to murdering innocent blacks with shotguns in police station foyers. Hardly the perfect crime, one might conclude. As per Dammers' lyrics, quote, I got down to London and what did I see? 1,000 policemen all over the street. The people were shouting and looking at me. They said, the Colin Roach's family demands an inquiry. End quote. Quote, prior to Roach's death, Hackney Black People's Association had been calling for a public inquiry into policing in the area, alleging that there existed a culture of police brutality, wrongful detention of black people, racial harassment and racially motivated stopping and searching. Ernie Roberts, the MP for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, said there had been a, quote, complete breakdown of faith and credibility in the police, end quote, in the area. And the Commission for Racial Equality called for a full inquiry into both the death of Roach and the policing in Hackney generally, end quote. The wheels of the same pressure group machine that would roll into action a decade later with the Stephen Lawrence case rolled into action. Anyone lucky enough to be in the vicinity of Hackney can drop by the Colin Roach Centre and pick up some further reader material. The 1990 album by Sinead O'Connor, I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, contains a photograph on the inner sleeve of Roach's sad-faced parents standing in the rain in front of a poster of their son. Below the image is the inscription, God's place is the world, but the world is not God's place. Seems quite Gnostic. That's open to interpretation. The song Racist Friend was sung by Hall's replacement and ex-girlfriend, Rhoda Dakar, on lead vocals. Dakar, one of 7 children, was born to an English mother and a Nigerian father in London. She had sung lead vocals on Two Tone's all-girl band, another Tavistockian box tick for the label, one might conclude, the Body Snatchers. If I might indulge myself in a editorial opinion here, this band really were dreadful. I've never been a fan of Two Tone, but I can see some objective musical talent in the specials, and maybe even to a lesser extent the selector. But Body Snatchers really are talentless dross. It seems very much like there was another reason to promote an all-girl, multiracial, countercultural product that went beyond just a punt from a right-on label boss. Their 2 appearances on Top of the Pops belie poor sales too, but again they seem to have been promoted far beyond their merit. One can only speculate on why that might be. Dakar is still involved in music and is a prominent supporter of Black Lives Matter, attacking anyone who criticised the Summer of Floyd and the looting that went along with it as, quote, part of the problem.
So how do you respond to people who say they support peaceful protests, but they condemn what they're calling rioting?
Bollocks. Simple as that. Bollocks. I can't be bothered to say anything to those people. So yeah, bollocks.
Okay, fair enough.
Bandmates The Selector were another female-fronted multiracial act, led by Belinda Magnus, Order of the British Empire, better known as Pauline Black. Born to a Nigerian father and a Jewish mother, Black was put up for adoption and raised by a white working-class family from Essex. She was awarded the Order of the British Empire in the 2022 Honours List, also being made Deputy Lieutenant of West Midlands in the same year. Lucky old West Midlands. Dam's outfit went on to have by far their biggest hit, with subject matter that again echoed his father's work, and the song Free Nelson Mandela, which also brought Dammers back into direct collaboration with Elvis Costello. Reaching number 9 in the UK singles chart, the song catapulted Mandela into the wider public consciousness. Mandela was the former leader of the military wing of the African National Congress. Under his rule, there were 13 terror attacks, including a car bombing in the South African Air Force building that killed 19 people and injured close to 200. From the US State Department's now declassified report, quote, the report claims significant links between the ANC and communist countries, noting that the ANC receives support from the Soviet bloc, Cuba, and a number of African nations, in addition to contributions from the West. The DoD report added that the ANC received many of its weapons from the Soviet bloc and listed among its political objectives the establishment of a multiracial socialist government in South Africa. End quote. But of course none of that mattered. Mandela was due to be the next great international hero who would help bring about the fall of a functional and economically successful South Africa, and this song would play its part in bringing his imprisonment into international renown amongst the general population of the West. The song was picked up by the global anti-apartheid movement, and with its simple and catchy refrain became an enduring song of the period. Not resting on his laurels, Dammers then set about work on organising a huge free concert on Clapham Common entitled the Freedom Festival. For this, he joined forces with the son of the then leader of the ANC, Oliver Tambo. The concert was preceded by a march through London, said to have been attended by 100,000 people, before the show itself on the Common, which is said to have attracted 250,000 people. Gathered to hear the music, punctuated by speeches from representatives of the ANC, SWAPO, and the British anti-apartheid movement. In the words of Dammers, quote, I organised several artists against apartheid events, culminating in the largest on Clapham Common, with a huge concert played by Peter Gabriel, Sting, Boy George, Maxi Priest, Hugh Masekela, and many more. End quote. He then worked with Madness, The Selector, The Pioneers, and UB40 on the track Starvation, which chimed in with Live Aid, highlighting the famine in Ethiopia. This culminated with a concert in Victoria Park, the same site as the Rock Against Racism concert of 1978. Dammers played a key role in this, getting Damon Albarn and Paul Simonon, the Good, the Bad and the Queen, to headline. I always say you don't have to love music, it's the hating racism that's important, stated Dammers. Hating racism should be as natural as liking music, or breathing air for that matter. Anti-racism is not political, it's just normal. I hope everyone will please support Love Music, Hate Racism, and help correct the hysterical lies and distortions of the BNP, who have been successful in stirring up a lot of hysteria about immigration. End quote. The lineup would include original Rock Against Racism veteran Sham 69's deeply dubious Jimmy Percy, Don Letts, and Polly Styrene from X-Ray Specs. The event also heard speeches from original Rock Against Racism founders Roger Huddle and Red Saunders. Dammers took it upon himself to compare the event and was brought to the stage by Damon Albarn, who credited him as being a huge influence on opening up my mind to things. End quote. Dammers took the mic and stated, the BNP are like weeds in the garden. They keep coming back. They're like mouth ulcers. And what do we do with mouth ulcers? We gargle. I want you to all gargle daily against the BNP. End quote. Inspirational stuff. Hot on the heels of this, he joined the organisation behind the 90th birthday celebrations of Nelson Mandela, the proceeds of which would go to the AIDS charity set up by Mandela, 46664. Yes, that's correct, 46664. The number is claimed to be in relation to his prison number being 4666, which was then added to with another 4 in relation to 1964, the year of his jailing. It all seems very fortuitous for a man many believe to have been a high-ranking Masonic agent throughout his entire life. Incidentally, the concert had a ticket limit of 46664. Each ticket was available for £65, 6 and a 5 being 11 in Masonic number of duality. Along with Dammers was compare Will Smith and his wife Jada, Michael Jackson, and many more, producer Quincy Jones. With Tavistock Inc.'s rank and file of Peter Gabriel, Stephen Fry, Queen with Paul Rogers, Annie Lennox, Amy Winehouse and Jerry Halliwell making up the numbers. Aside from DJing, Dammers had latterly formed the Special AKA Orchestra, a jazz and experimental project, which is largely inspired by the work of Sun Ra, a musician he now cites as his biggest influence. What was this hater of state overreach and every man fighting for the rights of the individual Dammers' views relating to the events of 2020, one might wonder? In his own words in June 2021, quote, "Ghost Town is a warning about this every man for himself ideology that the right wing lives by," says Dammers. "This is the reason why the greatest COVID deaths occurred in the UK, Brazil, India and Trump's America, as they were all concerned with money and not people. Lockdown too late, cronyism and mismanagement. The government will use COVID as an excuse for the financial hardship to come, but it was on the way with Brexit, which was hyped as no big deal. Ghost Town wasn't about one particular town, it was about anywhere, anytime and any place. So not locking down soon or hard enough is causing him to wail and gnash his teeth at the man." When we look at his career, never mind his father's and his ancestry, this sentiment is perhaps not surprising. Terry Hall died of pancreatic cancer in December 2022. The reformed specials, sans Dammers, had continued under the direction of original members, Hall, Linville Golding and Horace Panter. You won't be surprised to see that the subject matter remains very much on message. With the changing times, the death of George Floyd became a rallying call for them. They produced an album of protest songs covering social justice promoting artists, including Big Bill Broonzy, Brian Eno, Leonard Cohen and Bob Marley. They then released a single entitled simply Black Lives Matter, lending their weight to the 2020 socially engineered roving crime carnival and its subsequent psychological punishment beatings meted out to the wider European mind. So during COVID lockdown, vaccine mandates and all points in between, this voice of the streets took to an album of protest material. And guess what? The COVID agenda, Great Reset, World Economic Forum, etc., doesn't warrant a single message. Indeed, all seem fully on board with our benevolent government's sudden interest in the nation's health and subsequent policies. Quote, Terry Hall, quote, "The arrival of the pandemic affected me enormously." He says, "I spent about 3 months trying to figure out what was going on. I couldn't write a single word. I spent the whole time trying to figure out how not to die." End quote. To be clear, he was not diagnosed with cancer until very shortly before his demise in December 2022. The specials played concerts in vaccine-only venues, regaling crowds of freshly injected Roots Rocks Rebels enjoyers with their own particular brand of Tavistock-aligned protest songs. So encouraging the Black Lives Matter sneaker hunt while being fully on board with staying at home to save the NHS. No great surprise given the people involved. I'm not sure much of a conclusion is needed to this piece. It seems pretty evident to me that Dammers was more than just an angry young man with a record collection, and a central figure in a social engineering project that masqueraded as a youth movement. Far from the first and far from the last, but certainly one of the most effective.